Hello everybody, welcome to the latest instalment of Talking Pictures. For today's episode, I've searched up some great images of weather events that wreaked havoc in our region in days gone by. And for our first story, we're going to go back to 1863 and to the Shotover River, where diggers were furiously scratching through the gravel deposits hoping to strike it rich. Already that winter, a succession of floods caused by heavy rain and melting snow forced many diggers on the goldfield to start over. Then around 26th of July, as the Lake Wakatip Mail so eloquently put it, the diggers no sooner set to repair the damage done by the last flood, and the gorges and beaches of the Shotover River were once more populated by an industrious swarm of miners labouring to wrench from the stubborn soil its hidden and carefully guarded treasures, when yet again roared down the remorseless element, and their hopes were dashed to the ground. The Clutha River rose 6 metres overnight, while the Shotover rose 10. Arrowtown and Queenstown were flooded. A number of miners lost their lives in landslips and flash floods. On the Shotover, 2 huts became caught in the path of a landslide. 10 men, including 2 invalids, were in one of the huts. 2 men managed to evacuate one of the invalids. The remaining 7 men, and 4 in the second hut, were killed when both structures were smothered by the slip. The floods were followed by a great snowstorm that blanketed the goldfield in August. Miners again perished in the atrocious weather conditions, especially at the diggings high in the Old Man Range. A series of poles and guide wires had been set up along the track to the diggings at Potter's and Campbell's Creek to help miners find their way through the snow. Nonetheless, the storm still took the lives of several miners here, and the track was upgraded as a result. In 1928, the New Zealand government erected a monument at Gorge Creek alongside the highway between Roxburgh and Alexandra, in memory of those who died in the storm. On the 3rd of November 1865, the miners who had returned to the Shotover got hit again by a flood of significant proportions, one which the Goldfield warden declared was the severest flood experienced since the Great One in 1863. The waters of Stony Creek rose around 6 metres, and meanwhile the miners at Moke Creek were met by a nearly 2-metre high wave. In 1866, the latest great flood to swamp Queenstown saw lakefront business premises underwater and boats in the street. The headline in the Lake Wakatip Mail of the 13th of January read, "Great Floods, Immense Destruction of Property, Queenstown Flooded." This flood also destroyed a bridge at Maori Point on the Shotover, leaving skippers largely cut off, or at least forcing travellers to and from there to now make a long and arduous trek via Moke Creek. It was déjà vu for Queenstown during the Great Flood of 1878. Snow had lain deep on the ground following heavy falls in early August. It was clear that if the snow and ice were to thaw quickly, severe flooding would result. Town Creek turned into a raging torrent. Lake Wakatipu rose to a record high level, a record that would stand for 120 years until finally exceeded in 1999. Partially submerged buildings were destroyed as they were hammered by waves and floating debris. As the Town Creek burst its banks, the floodwater surged through the streets, gouging out deep channels as it went. Goods were removed and transported to higher ground, as water more than 1 metre deep entered buildings along the lakefront. At Eichardt's Hotel, the owner's assistant nearly drowned in the process of moving goods to safety when he fell into the cellar through an open trapdoor. And not all the goods were saved. a hogshead of port from the hotel was later found floating in the lake. The flood brought great quantities of gravel with it, which it proceeded to deposit in and around the buildings in the town centre. Icarts ended up with a layer of gravel that was around half a metre deep, deposited in the middle of its dining room floor. Meanwhile, downstream, Belle Clutha braced itself. 3 houses were carried away as the Clutha River broke its banks and submerged the township. There were several lucky escapes. Carrier and coal merchant Alexander Davidson wasn't so lucky. On October the 6th, he stepped into a deep hole that had been scoured out by the floodwaters and drowned. Several bridges further upstream had already been destroyed as the water rushed from the mountains to the sea. And on 14 October, the magnificent Belle Clutha Bridge also finally gave way to the forces of nature and was reduced to rubble in a matter of seconds. In 1917, the highest flood since 1878 hit the region. But this was soon surpassed by another in 1919. Flood protection works now reduced the impact in some places, such as Belle Clutha, but that was cold comfort for those in nearby Stirling, where buildings were washed away, and in Kaitangata, which was soon only accessible by boat. Next stop on our tour is Dunedin in 1923. On the 29th of April, low-lying parts of Dunedin such as South Dunedin, St Kilda, Musselburgh and Tainui became flooded. A large number of people were forced out of their homes as groundwater rose to a depth of anywhere between 15 and 60 centimetres. A landslip in Wilkie Road moved one home more than 6 metres. The family inside fled when the house started to shake ominously, and barely made it out before it was propelled off its foundations and shunted into a corner of the neighbouring house. In May, more rain caused the water of Leith to flood. And ultimately to spill over. Before the decade of the 1920s was over, it would happen again, and with even greater severity. The 1929 flood was the worst in the city's history. The Leith Street Bridge was washed away. As a result of the storm, more concrete channelling was installed along the water of Leith, and weirs were installed to help control the flow. Further flood protection work was undertaken in the 1950s and 60s, and again in more recent times. A discussion of wild weather wouldn't be complete without mentioning the Great Snow of 1939, a storm which even delivered snow to New Zealand's supposed winterless north. In Dunedin, the storm started on Monday, the 24th of July, and by Wednesday morning, the snow was 35 centimetres deep at St Kilda and up to a metre deep in the hill suburbs. The weight of snow caused roofs and skylights to cave in. William Cooper was attempting to clear snow from the roof of Penrose's drapery store when he fell through a skylight. He fell 10 metres to the floor, struck his head on a counter, and was killed. Fuses on the radio transmitters at Highcliffe on the Otago Peninsula blew when struck by lightning, and the staff there became cut off by the snowdrifts. A mission to provide supplies to the transmission station was launched. Director of the 4YA radio station, H. Ninnis, who had been with Shackleton in the Antarctic, along with 4 members of the Otago Ski Club, transported the supplies using one of Captain Scott's sleds that they had borrowed from the Otago Museum. When they reached the station, one of the men coming out to receive the supplies sank up to his neck in the snow. transport services ground to a halt until roads and tracks were cleared. So that's it for another episode of Talking Pictures. The good Lord willing, and if the creeks don't rise, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.